Hello, welcome to this training video on how to submit a reimbursement claim in Iowa Grants. This training in its entirety may be a bit long with all components included, so please bear with us. But please, after watching the video once, if you need a refresher, individual components are also listed separately on the GTSB website. This way you can only go back and watch one or two components if you need to. Step-by-step instructions, complete with screenshots, can be found for each of these reports on the GTSB website and also in Iowa Grants under Program Documents. Claims for reimbursement must be submitted within 90 days of the expense being paid by the agency. In addition, all claims for expenses incurred through June 30th of each year must be submitted by August 10th. All claims must be submitted no later than November 15th for reimbursement of the federal fiscal year ending September 30th. This new process eliminates the overtime spreadsheet, the HSP2, and the HSP3. You no longer need to attach these forms to each claim. So let's get started. Log into Iowa Grants. Click on My Grants and then select the grant for the current fiscal year. For our test agency today, we are using the Mayberry Police Department. Next, click on Claims. And then click on Add at the top of the page. Select Reimbursement from the Claim Type drop-down menu. It is pre-selected for you. Click on the calendar icon to enter your report period start and end dates. These dates should be the time period in which all of the activity was completed. If equipment was received, for example, in the month of October, and the overtime conducted was in October, then the report period must be October as well. Click Save in the upper right corner. Then click on Return to Components. This is your component listing, which we will come back to numerous times, but please note that by the time you are done, each one of these components must have a checkbox that says Mark Complete in that column. So general information, contract information, overtime spreadsheet, equipment accountability report, travel reimbursement, and claim supporting documentation, as well as total reimbursement, must be completed each and every time that you submit a claim. Note that the general information screen now has a check mark in the complete column. Now click on Contract Information. Verify that the information listed here is current and click Edit in the upper right-hand corner. The person submitting the claim must be listed either as the contract designee or the key personnel in Article 5 or 6 of the contract. If you are not sure who is listed in the contract, you may find the executed contract located in Program Documents of Iowa Grants. Answer the verification of contact information and click on Save in the upper right corner if everything is correct and you answer the question yes. If something is incorrect and you answer the question no, a text box will appear for you to enter in the correct information, along with a note that you need to contact your program administrator about the changes. If the information is correct, you may still proceed with the remainder of the claim. For our purposes, we're clicking yes, and then we're going to click Save in the upper right-hand corner. Next, we're going to select Mark as Complete. You will be returned to the component screen again. Note that check mark in the complete column. Now the real work begins. Click on Overtime Spreadsheet. Read the instructions box and then click Edit to answer the overtime question, yes or no. If the answer is no, click Save in the upper right corner and then click Mark as Complete. This would tell us that you have no overtime to submit for the month. You would then proceed on to the next component. If the answer is yes, click Save in the upper right corner. If you are a 402 contract, you will enter all overtime into the Overtime for General Enforcement box. If you are a 405D contract you will enter all of your overtime in the overtime for impaired driving enforcement box. If you have a split contract, your program administrator will provide you with this information, and you may be entering shifts into both the 402 and 405D overtime boxes. Either type of contract may include overtime for educational presentations. Overtime for special projects is used in the event your agency has a separate contract with GTSB for nighttime seatbelt enforcement, speed enforcement, or a pedestrian safety project. These projects have their own grant number and own contract, separate and distinct from any other contract type. You can locate your contract type in the grant/project line at the top of the screen. Once you know your contract type and which overtime box you will be entering shifts into, click Add in the upper right corner of the correct overtime box. Complete the fields listed. All of the questions should look familiar until you get to the question, total amount of overtime wages from the pay stub. This is quite different from the overtime spreadsheet. If you need to enter a partial number, you must enter a 0 before the decimal point. For instance, 30 minutes, enter 0.50. For 45 minutes, enter 0.75. In the past, on the overtime spreadsheet, most agencies listed things in date order. However, it's important to note, this is a new way of calculating overtime. And if an officer or deputy worked more than one GTSB given pay period, you may find it easier to enter each of those shifts using the same pay stub prior to moving on to the next person. Hopefully, this will save you a little bit of time. Some agency pay stubs have all of their overtime grouped together, no matter if it was overtime for the agency, GTSB overtime, etc. If this is your agency policy, make sure to enter the total number of hours worked from the pay stub you are working from. For example, in the one we're going to enter shortly, the total number of overtime hours worked is 14, but Andy Taylor only worked 13 hours of GTSB overtime, not 14. You still enter 14 hours of overtime into that box. Other agencies have GTSB overtime split out on their pay stubs and separated from any other overtime type. If this is your agency situation, make sure to enter the total number of hours from the pay stub from the GTSB line that you are working from. Our example today is Andy Taylor. So Andy Taylor's agency groups all overtime into one line item. You can see that his GTSB overtime shift was technically only 13 hours long, one 6-hour shift, one 7-hour shift. However, in the field for total number of overtime hours from the pay stub, he worked 14 hours of overtime. By entering the information in this fashion, you are no longer responsible for calculating the overtime rate of pay or rounding. We're hoping that this will eliminate many errors that we used to have to send back to you. When you are finished with your first entry, click Return to Top and then click Save in the upper right corner. Andy Taylor's shift that was just entered should now appear in this new electronic overtime spreadsheet. So you can see that Andy worked 6 hours of GTSB overtime. His total pay from the pay stub was $490 for 14 hours of overtime. The computer actually calculates the rate of pay at $35, multiplies it by the 6 hours worked to come up with a general reimbursement of $210. Let's try that again. So this time for Andy Taylor, he worked 7 hours of overtime. So we're going to complete this same process for each overtime category in which the shifts were were worked. If there were not any shifts worked in a particular category, you do not need to do anything. So for instance, do not click add and then enter zeros. So when we're finished entering numbers here, we return to the top, we click on save. And now you can see that Andy Taylor worked two overtime shifts in the month of October. So the same calculation we went through previously. If you need to make any changes, you can click on his first name, Andy, and make any changes that you need to make. One other note, we are asking now for this number of citations that were issued during this GTSB shift. We mentioned this in our site visits this year, and this is purely because we need to review citations when we come out and do a site visit each year. So in order to make sure that there were citations written, we are now asking you for this information. So that is something that's new. All right, let's go ahead and move on down. At Mayberry PD, Barney Fife actually worked for 2 hours for educational presentations. He presented traffic safety topics to the local driver's education class. As in the overtime table, you click add, complete the appropriate fields, paying attention again to the total number of hours worked on the pay stub versus the educational overtime worked. And when you are finished, you will return to the top and click save. So now we can see that we have Andy Taylor, who worked general overtime enforcement, and for educational presentations, Barney Fife worked 2 hours. So it's important to write down your reimbursement totals now for each section in which you entered overtime shifts. You will need these later when completing your total reimbursement section of your claim. When you are finished entering all of your shifts, click Mark as Complete. This will bring you to the components listing screen. Set your pay stubs aside. You will need to upload them later in the process. Please note, the total hours in this section must match the hours listed in the corresponding monthly activity report. If they do not match, your program administrator will reach out to you to determine which item needs correction and will then negotiate the correct item back to you via the Iowa Grants negotiation process. All right, we are back at the components. We have overtime spreadsheet complete. So next is equipment accountability. Click on that, read the instructions, and then click edit to answer the equipment question, yes or no. If the answer is no, click save in the upper right-hand corner, then click mark as complete, and then you would move forward to the next component. If the answer is yes, you do have equipment this month, you're going to answer that and then click save in the upper right corner. In the equipment accountability report box, click add to enter your equipment information. Select your equipment item from the drop-down menu and continue to complete each of the remaining fields. So we are entering an in-car camera with a price of $52.30. It was actually acquired on in October of 2020. The date the equipment is required should be the exact day the equipment was received. If it is close to the end of the state fiscal year on June 30th or the end of the federal fiscal year, September 30th, GTSB may need to request additional information. NHTSA likes to see that the equipment is purchased at the beginning of each federal fiscal year so that it can be used for traffic enforcement throughout the entire grant year. If this cannot happen, you can save yourself some extra work if you purchase your equipment no later than the end of May. Please note, absolutely all equipment must be received in-house at your agency no later than July 31st. There are no exceptions to this contract requirement. Let's take a look at unit price. So when calculating unit price, divide your total invoice cost by the number of pieces of equipment that you ordered. This includes any shipping and additional components to the main unit. This is a change from previous years. For example, if your invoice total is $52.30 for one camera, $52.30 divided by 1 is $52.30. This is what gets entered into the unit price field. Once you've answered all of the remaining questions, click Save in the upper right-hand corner. Now click Add in the right-hand corner of the Equipment Serial box. Select your equipment from the drop-down menu and continue to complete each of the remaining fields. When entering grant funds applied, note that the grant funds applied cannot exceed the amount the agency was awarded in the contract. In this case, the camera cost $52.30. However, the maximum grant funds applied is capped at $4,500 because that's what was awarded in the contract. At the other end of the spectrum, let's consider a purchase of PBTs. The calculated unit price was $385 per PBT. The agency in the contract was awarded $450 per PBT. So therefore, the grant funds applied box is only $385 because that's what the agency paid, not the $450. So when you are finished, click Save. If you have additional equipment on a separate invoice that you are claiming, you can repeat those steps, starting with Add in the Equipment Accountability Report box. When you have finished entering all of the pieces of equipment, write down your equipment reimbursement total. You will need this later in the process. Click Mark as Complete. Set your required documentation aside, and you will upload them later in the process. This would include the invoice, the proof of payment, and the pictures of the serial numbers that you are used to submitting. Now, we are down to travel reimbursement, so let's click on that. Read the instructions box, then click Edit to answer the travel reimbursement question, yes or no. If the answer is no, click Save in the upper right corner and then click Mark as Complete. Then you would move forward with the claim process. If the answer is yes, and you have travel reimbursements, click Save in the upper right corner. Click Add to enter a traveler, dates of training, and all travel expenses requested, and then click Save. You would continue to repeat these steps in order to get all of the travelers entered. If the travel was out of state, you will also need to submit your travel report. You no longer need to attach this separately, but by clicking on Edit in the upper right-hand corner, a text box will open up for you to type your report in. You can also type this in a Word document and then simply copy it in here if you'd like to do that as well. When you are finished typing your report, click Save. If you had additional travelers traveling out of state, you could repeat this process and do those additional travel reports as well. If the travel was in state, you do not need to submit a travel report. Write down your travel reimbursement total and click on Mark as Complete once you have everything entered. Set your required documentation aside, your registration receipts, meals, lodging receipts, etc. You will upload them next. Now you are finally ready to upload all of your supporting documents for all aspects of the claim. So do that, saving them in one PDF document and saving them on your computer. Now click on Claim Supporting Documents in the Components section. Please review the instructions to make sure you provide all of the required documentation for all of the categories. Click Edit at the top of the page. Then click Add. Now a button named Choose File should appear at the bottom of the page next to the claim supporting documents. Click on Choose File, locate the scanned file, double-click on it. Your file should now appear next to the Choose File button. In the description box, add a label. For instance, October claim documentation. In the upper right-hand corner, click Mark as complete. And finally, last component, click on Total Reimbursement in the Components section. Think of this section as your budget for the year, which includes your current claim amount. This is where you will reference your category totals that you wrote down as you worked through your claim. Enter each total in its respective box in column 2, titled Expenses this period. It's important to note here, we do not want you to enter any of your totals or any totals at all into column 7, titled Match this period. Another important note, the total you enter in column 2 for a given category cannot exceed the amount you were awarded, which is column 1. Likewise, if the total in column 2 is less than the amount you were awarded, the maximum reimbursement amount is the total allowable amount paid by the agency for that item. For example, the camera purchased in the equipment section of this claim is actually $52.30. However, when the total reimbursement section for the camera was entered into column 2, only $4,500 is entered because that is the maximum amount that the agency was awarded for the camera. This same concept applies to all line items in your budget. So you have entered all of your expenses this period into column 2. Column 7 remains at 0. Click on Save when you are sure that this page is correct. The next screen displays your claim total, so you can match that to your personal records. If you need to change a total that you entered, click on Edit in the upper right-hand corner, make your change, and then click on Save. When it is complete and correct, you can mark it as complete. You should now be back at the components screen, and all of the check marks in the complete column should be marked. You will not be able to submit your claim until there is a check mark in each one of these. Once you click Submit, all sections of your claim will be locked, and you will not be able to make any changes to them. If you need to make a change in a particular section prior to clicking Submit, simply click on the blue words of the component in which you need to edit. That section will then appear. Reference the section instructions for how to add, save, and mark as complete. Finally, you're done. You're sure everything's been submitted, added, uploaded. You can click Submit when you are ready to lock and submit your reimbursement claim. Once you say OK, you should receive this message. It's important to ensure that you receive the successfully submitted message to ensure your program administrator is notified of the claim submission. Once the program administrator reviews the claim, it will either be negotiated back to you for additional work or will be approved and forwarded to the finance manager for further processing. You may follow the status of the claim by clicking on Claims in the Grant Project Component screen and checking the status column. If you have any further questions, please reach out to your program administrator.